Why and how to identify wastes in your project. My name is Guilherme. I'm a project management expert. I help professionals and companies to develop their project management skills. I do that in several different ways, from providing training for people, from providing consulting for companies, for providing one-on-one mentoring. Sometimes I talk with project managers to help them to put some structure in their project to help them to build confidence to execute the project, but also to deal with different stakeholders. The thought I'm going to talk about is waste. And of course, it's a very important one because in the end, more waste you have, higher the cost that you have in one way or another. To talk about waste, it's impossible to talk about it without talking about a bit about the Toyota production system. If you don't know it, Toyota production system, or what's called, probably you've heard the name, lean management, lean manufacturing. It started at Toyota just even before the Second World War, but it increased it and it started to develop and gain more form after the Second World War. And when you talk about waste, you need to have a good definition to understand what's a waste in a process. So let me first give you some background. If you look for the Toyota production system or Lean, they have a definition what's value. Why? Because what they do not consider a value added activity, it's considered waste. Keep that in mind because that's going to be very important for you to understand wastes in your project. So value under lean perspective is something that transform a form or function of a service of a product. And that's something that the customer must be willing to pay for that and needs to be done correctly at the first time. Meaning that if you do something then you need to rework, that's the rework is considered a waste. So if it cannot fit any of those three categories there, that's not helping you to transform function or form of a service of a product that customer is not willing for pay for that and it's not done right for the first time, it's considered waste. Let me give you a very simple example. Like if you go for McDonald's, for example, just because everybody knows McDonald's. And if you order, let's say you order a meal there, and you sit it and you wait your order. Well, the time that you are waiting there, it's not something that you are willing to pay for that. That's considered so it's considered a waste. So every time that they can reduce the time to serve you, they're reducing the waste in their process. Meaning, of course, if they can reduce this time, they also can serve more people in the same store. That's very simple example. And if you look for Toyota, they have the seven wastes of lean or the seven deadly wastes of lean, if you want to call that. I know that in the picture you're seeing eight, but I'm also going to explain to you that. So the seven wastes of lean is transportation, like transporting something for one location, then for another one, then for another one, like you doing a manufacturing line. It's inventory, can be an inventory or stock of raw material, of work in progress items, or can be also a finished good inventory there. Can be motion, the workers doing motion like in a line that's not necessarily. Can be waiting, like you're just waiting for something so you can execute the work, or can be overproduction, meaning that the company is producing more than necessarily. Can be over processing, that you are doing more than it's required in a process. It can be a quality waste there, or in this case rework. And later on the unutilized talent was also added as a waste there. At this point, you might be wondering, okay, but I'm not working in a manufacturing environment, so this is not applicable for me. Uh, I have news for you. Yes, it's applicable for you. Of course, the way that you're going to look into your project, in a knowledge worker, like if you're doing design, if you're doing administrative work, is different than you're going to look in your manufacturing line. For example, if you go for a manufacturing line, you can very easy to see the inventory. But if you go for a knowledge type of work, you're going to see what's called a backlog. So it's important you to understand that those wastes, they're everywhere. Maybe you don't have some type of waste there. Maybe you're going to see, oh, I don't have transportation there. I don't have motion there. But you can have waiting waste. You can have inventory in a form of a backlog of tasks to be done. We are going to have rework and so uh, and everything else. How does this, how do I make this connection there? So with project management, well, your goal as a project manager is to deliver value. Basically, if you want to deliver value, more value you want to deliver, it's better for the company, for the project, for your team, and so on. So one of the things that you can do, because you look for ways to reduce waste, because in general when you reduce waste you reduce um, lead times, and you reduce cost. How this is important is relevant there. Let me show you something else here. Let me find it here. uh, when you talk about lead time to execute any type of tasks there, which I'm not finding the slides to illustrate in a better way for you there. Every time you're talking about lead time, there's two components that you need to consider in a lead time for anything there. There's basically what's called for a touching time to execute a task. That's what's of course the value added activity that you're doing there, and that's what's called the waiting time. If you put it in a project perspective there, if you request someone to do a report for you, they're going to do the report when they have availability to do the report, depending on their to-do list, depending on the priorities, and so on. So there's always a part of the time that's a waiting. So waiting, what's a waiting in your process there? It's waste. That's of course one of the important things that you want to do it, because in general for a project, if you want to reduce the lead time, you need to be able to identify the wastes in your process there. So that's the first step that's very important and key for you there. And I know that some people are maybe wondering there, yeah, but the waste that I have, how do I know if I have a lot of waste or not? So I'm going to give you an indicator there. That also comes, of course, from Lean. That's what they call the process cycle efficiency there. That's a KPI, and you can look for the different names of the KPI. PCA, it's a very common one when you talk about Lean. It's a KPI that's going to measure how efficient is your process. Because if I just told you that our process they have waste, for in our process in our companies in the world, you're going to find out waste. If you consider the Toyota definition here of value added activities there, so what do you want there? So I'm going to measure, okay, how much time I invest in adding value and how much I have waste. So using this efficiency process there, I collected some benchmark information here. And you can imagine there, if you do not know what type of waste you hear, you see benchmark data for operations there, but you have also business process like transactional, administrative, and creative and cognitive. That classifies much more as a project. So you see that a typical company there doing process or administrative work or knowledge work type, they have, depending on what you're doing there, their process cycle efficiency there is around 5%, I would say, for projects. And if it's a high-end world-class company, you reach a peak of 25% of efficiency there. Again, remembering what's efficiency there that I'm looking for, it's the amount of time it's invested in adding value divided by what's considered waste in the process there. So our process, our companies, they have a high amount of waste. And in general, you're never going to be able to put the waste to zero because it's impossible. Even though if you say there's a task that the customer is not really willing to pay for that, but you need to do that. If you go for the example of McDonald's, like I doubt that the customer is really willing to pay for you do the accounting there in the store, making sure that you match the numbers and to make sure that the cash or the amount of revenue is correct and so on. Usually the customer will not be willing to pay for that. You say you are going to pay extra for a Big Mac just because they say they are going to, okay, they are going to make sure that the numbers are matching in the store. At the end of the day, you don't care that, or at least I, as a customer, I don't care about that. So you are not something that you are going to be willing to pay for that, although it's something that the company needs to do it to make sure that they are operating a proper way. So, but if you look for under the Toyota perspective, this is a kind of waste. So, what do you want there? You want to minimize the time as much as possible. That's of course with the use of technology, it can be much faster. You are not counting stuff manually there. Everything's registered into a system, so it that can go much faster. You are reducing waste to optimize the efficiency of your overall process there. So in general, that's what you want. So why identify ways? Identifying ways will help you to reduce your lead time. Identifying ways will help you to reduce your costs and will help you the company to be more efficient. If you do that as a project manager, or if you do that as a project manager, meaning that you're adding more value for your company, you're adding more value for your project, you're adding more value for your team, and in the end, more value you're going to add as a project manager, of course, higher the expectations that you can have for your career, salary wise, expectations of growth, because companies, what they want people that are adding value for the organization. Again, value can mean a lot of different things in an organization, but it's very important that you understand that identifying waste and reducing those waste, it's a very good way to add value. How does it happen in practice in a project? Well, you can find out that you can find out, for example, a process, for example, to create a purchase order there. You can reduce it. Why? Because think about a project. If you say I'm going to build a bike there, and the company will just assemble the components. And so the supplier is going to deliver the components. The lead time for the supplier to deliver the components it starts to count after you create a purchase order, after they receive the purchase order, and after you request the purchase order, and after they receive the purchase order, there's always a gap there. There's always a gap that you can try to close it. If you can make the process more efficient, faster, you're reducing waste. If you reduce this waste, you're reducing your lead time for the project for the suppliers to delivery, so you're reducing the lead time also to from the start to begin, so you can deliver faster to your customer. So this is very important and very value added activity there that you can do in a project. One of the very interesting and good ways to identify value, mainly when you're talking about the type of work that we do, knowledge work as a project manager, so you're not going to be dealing with a production line, or we do it depending on the type of project, but the production line will be a second step. Your day to day is not, as a project manager, is not the production line. So think about this. One of the very good ways to help you to identify ways is basically what's called the Kanban. Why? Because the Kanban is going to make it visual the steps of the process. For example, if you're looking into lean manufacturing, very commonly talk about value stream mapping is basically detailing step by step what needs to be done there. So when you're doing a Kanban, if you do it in the right way, you're going to start to kind of mapping. You're going to map the value stream map. For example, let me give you an example of a Kanban to make this a bit more concrete. Like this is a workflow. That's something an example I created for a design work. Let's assume that there's a design team. So the design team they start their work when they have the requirements clear. They create a drawing. The drawing goes to the customer. The customer reviews, gives feedback. Then they implement this feedback from the customer in the drawings. Then it goes for a final approval from the customer. Then it's considered that a drawing is released. Think about like a design of a house, for example. Very simple example. Why? Because a house, everybody knows what's a house. Think on that one. So if you have those steps here, and if you start to do so those steps in a Kanban, if you start to identify, okay, what's the waiting points that you have, when you do that, you make it, you start also to visualize the type of waste that you have in your process there. Think about in what I'm showing you here, you have this step here calling drawing review, and you have a huge number of items in a waiting list. Now think about me. Think with me. If I mention to you that the lead time is composed by a waiting time plus a touch time. Waiting again, touch time is the time they're really executing the work. In this case, reviewing a drawing. And waiting time is based on their priority list, based on their to-do list. This task will be like in the pipeline to be executed. In this case, the system is kind of already clocked there because there are so many items to be done there. If you get a new drawing there to be reviewed and it follows a normal system, your lead times will jump in from, I don't know, maybe a week for months just because the way you're doing that. So there's huge amount of waste that you can identify there. Of course, the reasons for the waste, you are going to talk about the bottleneck of a process. You can talk about how to solve this bottleneck to avoid this waiting time. But when you are identifying wastes in your process, you also are going to be able to look for ways to optimize it. And that's what you want. Because in general, what do you want in a process? A lot of companies they talk about reducing time to market. They want to go faster than their competitors and so on. But not all the companies they have clear what are the bottlenecks in the process. What's exactly their process cycle efficiency there? Why this is important? Because at the moment that you're aware of, and this is I'm talking about a typical company, but if you go for a company that's very bad in bureaucracy on or how they operate, this number can be even lower. And then you're going to find, okay, my company has a process cycle efficiency right now of 5%. How do I improve it? Because if you get to a point that you can measure it, you start to visualize the wastes. At the moment that you start to visualize the wastes, you can work on them to solve them. That's why Kanban it's a great tool to help you to do that in a project. Because differently from a manufacturing line, because depending on the type of manufacturing, if you are working on like an assembly line for a car and you find a big inventory or a big of stock of components, usually you can see them physically. But when you talk about a project, for example, you're not going to see nowadays a pile of drawings to be reviewed. Some companies that are a bit more organized, they have this already in a system, but very often people do not take a look on how the backlog looks like. So that will help you to manage the amount of work that you need to do to avoid that you get to a situation where you have a huge backlog. And what happens with the organization? They have those bottlenecks here with huge backlogs, and they keep putting more things in the system, and the work is not flowing. If you do not know, let me give you a very short explanation what's a bottleneck here. Bottleneck is basically what's going to limit the flow of work of your project. If you look for the theory of change, the theory of constraints there, that's the weakest link that you have there. So if you look for the image here for a pipe, the bottleneck is when the pipe reduce its diameter. So the flow of stuff that can pass through, the flow theoretically here, because your work is not going to flow to a pipe, but you can give an idea. And your capacity is always composed by four things. A capacity of a system by availability, meaning number of hours that the system can work. The performance, like if the performance is nominal there, or if it's reduced. When you talk about performance, I always like to give the example of the car. Think about if you have a Porsche, but you're the maximum speed that you can reach in the car is 100 kilometers per hour because it's a problem, I don't know, in the engine, for example. So your performance of a Porsche can be much higher, up to 200 kilometers there, but because of there's an issue in the machine, you have a performance limitation. Of course, this is an example of a physical machine. We are talking when you talk about performance, we are talking about people, and our performance will vary a lot day by day, depending how well we feel it, depending how much sleep we have, how much water we are drinking. There's a lot of things that will influence your performance here. But in general, you want to have people working close to their maximum, to their nominal performance there, how much they can produce. And you have quality. Quality is, of course, if there's rework, if it's not rework, but then you have what's called the bottleneck of the system. which is really going to limit how fast a process can go. If I go back to this example here, you're going to see the bottleneck of the system very clear. So using Kanban, it's a great way to help you to identify bottlenecks in your system. It's a great way to help you to identify also wastes in your system. Because that might as well be that, for example, if you are working, depending on the type of work that you're doing here, you identify that you have a, let me give you an example. You have this step here that's called drawing feedback customer review, but the customer, they don't want to do that for any type of reasons, and generally you end up wasting time and you don't get anything as a feedback. So there's one extra step that you do some stuff, but the customer does not want it, the customer is not willing to pay that, and does not add any value there. So that's a step that's considered fully a waste in the step, not only the waiting time here. Might seem a weird example because you are going to say, the customer always want to see, the customer always want feedback, but just to showcase to you that's possible that when you're mapping the flow of work, that you find out stuff that was not required. For example, I did this exercise here with a team that they were coordinating samples for a lot of different products. And for one of the activities that they had there, they had like a form where people would put a request. Then they people would send this request to them. They would copy this form for a spreadsheet in a SharePoint, and with this spreadsheet, they would do other tasks that they needed to execute it. The first thing that when we were talking about mapping their workflow there, I just asked why you're asking people to complete a form and then you copy the information that's in the form to put in a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is already in their SharePoint. People can have access to that because it's all people inside of a company. Why don't you ask them to add the information directly in the spreadsheet? And then they look at me. Oh, that's true. That's one step that they were doing that was fully waste. There was no value added here. That will just create much more waste because you can imagine, depending on the number of requests, you get a lot of emails. So you need to make sure that you organize those emails. You need to make sure that you copy all the forms that you get by mail. You need to make sure that you open the form that you go for a mail to copy for a spreadsheet. So you added a lot of waste in a system that's not required. So, and this is the example I'm giving to you here. It that pop up like in 30 minutes discussion. So more you go into details of your workflow, more you're going to learn how to improve your process. Where do you have waste? What can you do? And then you start to manage your workflow. And that's exactly what's done in lean manufacturing. Of course, lean manufacturing does not only do that. There's a lot of other stuff that can do that. But when you talk about wastes, when you talk about value stream mapping, that the manufacturing line does it, that's what you're trying to do. What are the steps that we follow? What steps make sense? And where do we have waste? And it might as well be that you're going to find waste, and then the waste is the required there. For example, in this case of the form, that might be that it's someone external for the company, so they cannot access the our SharePoint. I know that's feasible technically to create it. I'm just giving you an example, and so they don't do it. So might as well, if that's something that you leave, that you need to have it, you need to have it. But more understanding that you have there, more you're going to be able to add value in what you do there. Of course, something like that will not come from one day to another, but it's very so. If you do not understand first what's the concept of value, and so that's the first one that you need to know it, and very important one because I always say that, and I'm going to repeat again. The the ultimate goal of any project is to deliver value for organization. Value can be measured in several different ways, but you need to understand what's value for the organization. Here you have a criteria to define what's a value added activity and what's not. If something, for example, if you are creating a new product and then say testing and quality, yeah, that's something that it's a lot of the customers they are willing to pay for that. So it's a value-added activity. Of course, when you talk about quality, you can always have a point that starts to, depending how far you go with quality, starts to be a waste. But not in having anything with quality will create more problems. Then you're going to create other types of waste, like rework there. So it's very important for you to understand that. And so looking to those numbers here, it's kind of shocking that the companies are not aware of that. And I've done this presentation several times in several occasions with a lot of different people. Nobody ever guessed that the level of efficiency is so low in organizations. That's why it's important to bring awareness. But think about on your perspective there. Let's assume that you're a project coordinator, a junior project manager, and you want to add value there. If you start to work with your team to map and to start measuring and identify those things, you're already going to be seen as a kind of very different type of professional there because you're not going to see a lot of people that discuss those numbers. A lot of people they are too busy doing the work and they forget that your goal is to add value and they're going to be there. I've seen even senior project managers they are too busy putting paperwork in place, doing meetings, and they forget that all those things they exist there for a reason. Because in the end, the company wants a value-added activity. They want the value for the project there. So here, when you talk about waste, you can think about waste uh, of hours in meetings. So waiting time. If you do a meeting, what kind of value that you get from this meeting there? What if you do a documentation, what kind of value that you get from the documentation? And again, those are the examples of waste from Lean. If you say I'm not going to classify this as a waiting, I'm going to classify it as a rework, or you're going to create extra inventory or extra stock or extra backlog, how you want to do it. Or you can do like I haven't utilized Thailand. I've seen meetings, people running project meetings with 30 people in a meeting. That's a very unproductive meeting. Why? Because from 30 people, only 4 talks for 1 hour. So you have 26 people that they are seated, they are not adding anything for the project, they are not doing anything else. So you're wasting 26 hours of work. They could have doing different types of activity that would help the project to progress instead of sitting in a meeting there. So be aware of those things. More you recognize it, more will help you to go deeper into this discussion. And if your organization does not have this awareness there, it's not going to bring you're not going to be able to bring this from one day to another, but you need to start those discussions. You need to start to visualize those things because that's how you're going to bring awareness for organization and that's how you're going to help the organization go for the next level. And again, what's in there for you? If you help your organization to grow, chances are that you are going to have more possibilities for a career. If you have more value added, likely, you hope or hopefully at least more possibilities you have for your income, your salary, because your salary is always proportional to your contribution. Because in the end, the company needs to make a profit. So if you add 300 of value, the company can pay you half of that and still have a very decent profit. If your value that you can add is 10, the company will not pay you 10. And here I'm just using random numbers to exemplify it, but this is a very good way that you can add value in your organization. It's not a simple way to do that because bringing awareness and understanding for people usually does not it's not a easy thing to do it, but just by starting the discussions, you are going to be able to add value for your career, you're going to be able to add value for your team, and you're going to be able to face a lot of different types of challenges together. Because if you have a team working together to manage the flow, you can find the bottlenecks, you can find the struggles that makes much easier to prioritize. What happened in a lot of organizations? They don't have visibility in what's going on, so it's difficult to prioritize, it's difficult to assign resources, and that's the beauty that the Kanban can help you. The Kanban will make things visual. That's why even again Kanban also started with the Toyota production system. If you look for a kind of free translation of the word Kanban, what does that mean? That's cards you can see. A Kanban, so it's a visual management tool, or as sometimes PMI likes to call it, the information radiator. Because if you have something that's in the wall, everybody can see it. So you're spreading the information there. And every time you do that, you're facilitating transparency, which of course that's what you want. Because transparency also will help to build trust, will help to build relations, and so on. So a Kanban, it's a great tool that can help with a lot of stuff. And usually there's a pain in a company there, and that's where you should start it. And this pain point, you can start by discussing this pain to make this visible. But invariably, you're going to talk about when you talk about organizations, you're going to talk about overload, you're going to talk about waste. Or they're not going to put in exactly those words, but they're going to tell this process takes too long. That's too much bureaucracy. Those are kind of signs that you can look into a Kanban or you can look into a flow to make sure that you can make this, that you can optimize this. So this is a great tool that you can use in all your projects because everything I'm showing you to here, I'm talking here, and of course, a lot of this it comes from production, it comes from manufacturing environment, but this can be used in any type of office that you work there. It can be used to manage your own tasks, it can be used to manage the tasks of your team, because this is a visual management way, which is going to facilitate team alignment, transparency, and so on. So if you have never tried, try start those discussions and try to start to identify those ways. And if people don't believe on you, just show the benchmark table that I showed you because usually that kind of creates an initial shock that helps to put people in movement. Although people will say our process is much more efficient, most of the cases where they're going to say that without having any data there or without having any measurement there, but invariably when you start to measure them, you're going to start to find those inefficiencies there. Make sure again that you don't forget to follow me for more content. Every week there's more content. On an Instagram, I share content every day. Every day there's a Q&A box open that you can ask all type of project management related questions there. Also, don't forget to like and share this video here because that helps me, helps my channel to grow, helps also more people to learn about those things, and will help more people learning on project management and also more people understanding the value that Kanban can bring to a project. If you have questions, you can ask here in this video or you go for the Q&A box on Instagram. But if your goal is to develop your project management skills, my goal is to support you in that journey. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.